Chapter 1. This happened. There was once a boy who turned into a dog. This doesn't happen every day. If it did, the world would soon be short of boys and overrun with dogs. What's more, it would hardly be a story worth telling. It would be like, there was once a boy who had his breakfast, or there was once a boy who walked down the road. Luckily, for storytellers, at least that isn't the way of it. There are common happenings in this world, and uncommon. So, there was once a boy who turned into a dog. The boy's name was Eric Banks. He was 10 years old. The dog he turned into was a Norfolk Terrier. Eric Banks was a quiet boy most of the time. Steady worker, methodical, his school report said. He was the kind of boy who didn't make a rush for the back seat of the bus, or go mad when the first snow fell. He was left-handed, right-footed, and rather small for his age. He had freckles. Eric lived with his parents and his little sister. Her name was Emily, and she was 3. His dad was a postman. His mum had a part-time job in a shop. Eric himself had a paper round, which he shared with his friend, Roy Ackerman. Actually, he was too young to have the round. It belonged to his cousin. But she had broken her arm, and Eric's dad was a friend of the newsagent, so Eric was standing in. Eric first turned into a dog a little at a time in his own bed. His parents were downstairs watching television. His sister was fast asleep in the next room. The time was 9:10. The day, Wednesday. The month, June. Until then, it had been a normal day for Eric. He'd done his paper round with Roy. He'd gone to school. He'd had 2 helpings of his favourite dinner. He'd played with Emily before tea and Roy after. He'd watched television, had a shower and gone to bed. Now he was in bed and turning into a dog. It happened like this. Eric was lying on his side with his eyes closed. He was almost asleep. Suddenly he felt an itch inside the collar of his pyjama jacket. This, although he didn't know it yet, was the fur sprouting. He felt a curious tingling in his hands and feet. This was his hands and feet turning into paws. He felt his nose becoming cold and wet, his ears becoming flappy. Eric opened his eyes. He didn't panic straight away. This was his nature partly, but also he was still half asleep. The thought in his mind was, I'm turning into a dog. That was another thing about Eric. He was a good guesser. When Emily first learned to talk, it was usually Eric who guessed what she was trying to say. He could guess the mood his teacher was in, just from the way she held her book in assembly. Now, on the evidence of a furry paw where his hand should have been, he guessed he was turning into a dog. He didn't suppose he was turning into a werewolf, for instance, which is what Roy Ackerman would have thought. He didn't suppose he was dreaming either, which he was not. The time it took Eric to turn into a dog, his shape blurring and rippling like a swimmer underwater, was about 15 seconds. The time it took him to become frantic was about 5 seconds after that. His first action was to begin scrabbling in bed, trying to get a better look at himself. His thoughts were in a turmoil. I'm a dog! A dog! And the next thing he did was try to get out of bed. This wasn't easy for a dog in pyjamas. Besides, they were baggy on him now. Eric leapt and landed in a heap. He kicked his way clear of the trousers and backed out of the jacket. He resisted the urge to growl when one of his claws got caught in a buttonhole. He sat on the floor and thought, I'm a dog. It was now 9:15. The last of the evening sunlight was shining through the green curtains. Everything in the room, furniture and wallpaper, Eric's books and toys, his junior science kit, his clothes laid out on a chair beside the bed, was tinged with green light. And there is a picture of Eric the dog in his pyjamas. Next door, Mr. Phipps was mowing his lawn. Eric got to his feet, all 4 of them, and walked uncertainly across the room. He put his front paws on the dressing table and stared into the mirror. A furry, rather surprised-looking face stared back. I don't believe it, he thought, and then, I look like a Norfolk Terrier. Eric knew a bit about dogs. He'd done a project on them with Roy in the 2nd year. Once more, Eric sat on the floor. He was bewildered, to say the least. A confusion of questions jostled in his head. How could it happen? What's the cause of it? Why me? He went to the window, put his paws on the sill, ducked his head under the curtain and looked out. Mr. Phipps was emptying the grass cuttings into a compost heap. A wisp of blue smoke was rising from a bonfire in the next garden along. Eric left the window and, with no clear aim in mind, nudged open the bedroom door with his head. He went to the landing. He couldn't see much, it was gloomy, but he could smell all kinds of things. There was biscuit crumbs in the carpet. There was talcum powder. He felt the urge to sniff around. Soon he came upon a chocolate button, which his sister must have dropped. She had been eating them earlier that evening. Eric studied the button. At that moment, the thought in his mind was, being a dog might not be all bad, and he ate it up. And there he is, on his legs, looking in the mirror to see if he really was a dog. And that is the end of chapter 1.